Of wildfires, and we know the Smokey Bear campaigns. This homeschool co-op here got to meet Smokey Bear in the flesh. That would be cool, right? And this campaign began again in the early 1900s, and their goal at the time was to prevent any and every wildfire. Their assumption was any wildfire is a devastating wildfire. But listen to this article as the years went by and research was done on the forest and the ecosystem of the forest and the health of the trees. And as they begin to analyze the data from the Smokey effect, the Smokey Bear effect, they said it gradually became apparent that decades of highly successful fire prevention had been storing up problems for the future. Analysis of tree rings revealed that a substantial fire would be expected to sweep through an unmanaged forest once or twice a decade. The larger trees would survive, but much of the undergrowth and pine needles would be burned away. It turned out this process was vital to the health of the forest. Now, of course, we do controlled burns, and there's better science and things like that. But who would have thought something like a raging wildfire in due season in God's sovereign orchestration of life on this planet was actually good for the trees, good for the forest, for the life of the forest? We talk about the unintended effects of the wicked. I'm not saying the wicked is good because it has good effects somehow in God's sovereignty and in His providence. Wickedness is still wickedness. Sin is still sin because God can turn the schemes of the wicked into good is only reflective of His goodness. And not that wickedness can now be called good because God uses it. Notice when Joseph was responding to his brothers, he didn't say, you did okay, God was always going to use that for good. He said, no, you meant it for wickedness. You meant it for harm. You meant it for evil. Right? No doubt about it. Evil was evil. You throwing me in the pit was evil. You lying to my dad was evil. Right? Potiphar's wife, lying, evil. But God meant it for good. See? See, when wickedness happens in this world, and when it is directed at the righteous, when it is directed at the faithful, it turns out it actually has a kind of forest fire effect. It hurts for the moment, but it's actually quite good for us in the end here. And so when the wicked scheme against the righteous, it has an unintended effect of increasing their growth in faith in the Lord, pressing them deeper into His safe hands, making them more confident in His goodness and power. It has the opposite effect than maybe the wicked one intends, when he intends to pry us, when he intends to shatter our faith, when he intends to make us question God. What we find out in Scripture is it has the opposite effect on the believer. This psalm, as I told you this morning, was written when Doeg told Saul that David had been seen with Ahimelech. Ahimelech there at the temple had given aid to David, even inquired of the Lord for David. And as David reflected on this, we don't know how long later, and he penned this psalm, the conclusion was essentially this. This wicked, pompous, arrogant Edomite had intended wicked, pompous, arrogant schemes, but God's love never failed. And not only did God's love never fail, but David actually was established and rooted, and he did quite well in this. And so that's where this psalm comes from. The man meant harm, and a lot of harm came from his actions. You know, many lives were killed, men, women, children, because of the actions of the Edomite, Doeg. And so, but God does something wonderful, not just through this wicked and dark time. He does something wonderful in David's soul. Again, as David contemplates this episode, as he's penning this psalm, he can look back and he can see the effects this negative, traumatic experience had in his walk with the Lord, and how it had the opposite effect, I think Doeg would have intended, or certainly the evil one would have intended. And so what I want to do is just kind of show you that this song is broken into 3 stanzas. And each stanza focuses on a different audience or a different participant in this drama. And the first participant is the wicked participant, particularly Doeg, I think, in this story. But I call this first point the composition of the wicked. The composition of the wicked in verses 1 through 4. Let's just go ahead and read all of it, though, and then we'll break it into its 3 parts. All right, Psalm 52. This is to the choir master, a maskil of David, when Doeg the Edomite came and told Saul, David has come to the house of Ahimelech. I'll go back just a minute because this is going to play a role. Notice the title of this. That's the subtitle, but notice the title. Isn't that a great title? You reflect back on a negative experience, one that their lives were lost, horrible things happened. Your life was put in danger, and what do you call it? The steadfast love of God endures. Right? Isn't that a beautiful title for this? Okay, going back to this. So, why do you boast of evil, O mighty man? The steadfast love of God endures all the day. Your tongue plots destruction like a sharp razor, you worker of deceit. You love evil more than good, and lying more than speaking what is right. You love all words that devour, O deceitful tongue. But God will break you down forever. He will snatch and tear you from your tent. He will uproot you from the land of the living. The righteous shall see and fear and shall laugh at him, saying, See the man who would not make God his refuge, but trusted in the abundance of his riches, and sought refuge in his own destruction. But I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. I trust in the steadfast love of God forever and ever. I will thank you forever because you have done it. I will wait for your name, for it is good in the presence of the godly. What a great, beautiful piece of poetry this is. And you can see, if you kind of follow along, that it's broken into three different stanzas, three different focal points. And the first one is, of course, Doeg, the composition of the wicked. And when I say composition, I'm talking about what makes something up. Like, what is it made of? The composition of the human beings, like the material. We got cells and all the different things that make up a cell, and the tissues and our psychology and our emotions. It gets pretty complicated. Then you have plant life is composed of different things, right? The different parts. Or if you're not really so much into the sciences, you think of the composition of a sentence. And you think of all the different parts of the sentence. How many of you all look back with cold sweats in the middle of the night and think of diagramming sentences? You probably look back with fondness. I apologize. And you probably do too. You like that sort of thing too. Y'all should get together and have a sentence diagramming conversation. But we break down the sentence into its various parts. And the main reason we look at things in parts is so we can better understand what those things are and why they are the way they are and how they function. Well, similarly, as we're going to look at the composition of the wicked in verses 1 through 4, it's to do just that. Why would we want to break down the composition of the wicked? What parts the wicked have, right? Why does that matter to us? Well, the same reasons we would want to know the composition of anything. So we could see why they are that way and how it works so that we can guard ourselves against parts in our lives that would lead us to wickedness as well. All right, and so there are components or parts to the wicked here in verses 1 through 4, and I've identified 4 different parts. Not going to take too long on them, but let me just help you notice them. First of all, in verse 1, boasts in might. A wicked person boasts in might. And of course, you see that right off the bat. Why do you boast, O evil, mighty man, right? You see those two things together. So that's the first thing. He boasts. And what you're going to notice is there are some of these things that are more something he does, and then you're going to notice some of these things are something he is. All right? So you're going to see these two different kind of parts to it. The second one is he's ignorant of God's goodness. When you look at the latter part of verse 1, you see this phrase, the steadfast love of God endures all the day. Now, why in the world would David include that phrase right there after he says, why do you boast of evil, O mighty man? The main reason he does this is to show you're boasting about your scheme, you're boasting about your might, you're boasting about what you are and what you think you're doing, and you have forgotten or you're ignorant to the fact that God's steadfast love endures forever. You think you're scheming, but God is loving me through this. You see? And so in this sense, he's ignorant of God's goodness. So he boasts in might. He's ignorant of God's goodness. That's an internal thing Doeg is dealing with. And then thirdly, look how he uses his speech. He uses his speech for evil in verse 2. God looks down from heaven on the children of man. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong one. Your tongue plots destruction like a sharp razor, your worker of deceit. You see that? Two different things he uses his tongue on. One is to destroy. Right? You use your tongue to destroy. Your tongue plots destruction. Speaking of forest fire, do you remember what James had to say about the tongue? How it could spark a little fire that turns to a raging fire. And it says even the tongue is set ablaze by what? By the fires of hell. Right? The tongue can be set ablaze by the fires of hell. That is a destructive tongue here for the evil to use. And that's going to play a role into this illustration, right? Here's the Edomite. He's using his tongue to stir up Saul against David. He's lighting a fire that God is going to internally use to refine David, to help him prosper, to do well. Not only do they use their speech for evil to destroy, they use it to deceive. Doeg is misleading the king. He's causing misdirection. First of all, he got it wrong, what happened with Ahimelech, didn't he? He didn't realize Ahimelech was hesitant to help. He didn't realize that David lied to Ahimelech, or maybe he did, but he lied about that too. Either way, he's using things to cover, or his speech to cover up the truth here. And so in the composition of the wicked, a wicked person boasts in their might. You could probably add boasts in themselves. They're ignorant to God's goodness. They use their speech for evil. And then here's another internal one. So boasting is external, ignorant is internal, speech is external. Here's an internal one. Inordinate affections. You say, what? Misplaced values, misplaced loves, preferences. Look at verses 3 and 4. He says, he doesn't say do evil. What does he say? You love evil more than good. You love lying more than speaking what is right. You see, these are reversed affections from what they should be. Opposite of God, certainly. He loves evil more than good. He loves lying more than truth. He loves destructive words. And God doesn't value any of those things. You know what I thought about as I was reading these inordinate affections that David is talking about? I thought of the modern movies and art and literature. How they have taken what's called, the tragic hero. The villain, right, is actually now the hero. You think of the people that you love in the films, it's the hitman that you love. It's the murderer you love. It's the con artist you love. And they frame these stories so that you'll identify more with them than you do the police. You see? It's reversing kind of our right and wrong. And if you watch these movies long enough, you'll pick up on that. And you see this all over in the art. When a mobster's the guy you walk away loving from, when the killer's the guy you walk away loving, then you know that we've got misplaced affections. And that's in part wicked. That is in part what it means to be wicked, is to have misplaced affections. And so the composition of the wicked man again shows the insides. Our insides is that we love the wrong things. That's what a wicked person does. They love the wrong things and they're ignorant to the goodness of God. But then on the outside, what do? They boast. They love deceit. They deceive people. And isn't it interesting that you see this back and forth between inside and outside? Because isn't that precisely what Jesus tells us? Isn't this the same flow in Jesus' assessment when he says, it's not just what goes into your mouth that defiles a person, but it's what comes out of the mouth that defiles the person? Right? Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so the inside, outside composition, they match, right? These boastful speeches are because of the love for the wrong things and the ignorance to God's goodness. Speech demonstrates what the heart contemplates. Now, I've had pastors, and I've always thought this was cheesy, though I think if there was ever a time to do this, I'd say, all right, church, repeat after me, because I think this is worth remembering. Speech demonstrates what the heart contemplates. Speech demonstrates what the heart contemplates. So that when somebody finds you saying something, and you said, I wasn't having a good moment, you just caught me off. No, maybe your heart's just not contemplating the right things. Right? Maybe your loves are out of whack. Right? Maybe you're ignorant to what God's doing right now, and you just said something ignorant, right? But the truth is that is your heart telling on you. Right? And so that's the composition of the wicked. The second thing we see in this is David kind of shifts the camera here. You want to watch your hand, I'm going to step on you. as he shifts the camera here, I call this secondly, the comeback of the Lord. The comeback of the Lord. Now, there are a lot of great comebacks in the world. I was never quick enough to come up with many of them. And you know what a comeback is, right? Where somebody says something and you're quick to give a good snappy line back. Let me just give you a few if you've never done this. This is one I heard. It said, I'd give you a nasty look, but you've already got one. Ooh. Right? Here's another one. Someday you'll go far. And I hope you stay there. It's pretty good. I'll never forget the first time we met, but I'll keep trying. These are just like quick comebacks people have or whatever. Maybe they, got felt insulted and they just, we do this. Not endorsing this, by the way. Not saying we should do this. God has his own kind of comeback, though. Understand that. He's got his own retort to this. Psalm chapter 2, verse 4 says, God laughs at wicked men. Not because he takes delight in wickedness or because he finds it funny. It's not that kind of laughing. What he finds funny is that they actually think they can upend his plans. That they actually think they can harm his children. They actually think they can do some permanent damage to him or impugn his character. And that makes God laugh. In a mocking kind of laughter in that sense. God's response is something that should give, according to David here, in verses 5 through 7, is something that should give all that scheme wickedness a pause. It should give them the shivers, if you read this correctly. Verse 5, but God will break you down forever. He will snatch and tear you from your tent. He will uproot you from the land of the living. Remember this morning we talked about being cut off. Being cut off, break down, snatch and tear, uproot, disconnected, unplugged. And I mentioned this morning that, look, there's still time for you. Hell's the ultimate expression of what this looks like. But until that day, until the day of judgment, there's still time to connect to God. There's still time to plug into that flow of grace at the cross of Jesus Christ. But as David is telling this, he's warning Doeg in this song, and any who would scheme as Doeg schemed, that this isn't going to end well for you. Saul may have been the greater villain in the Davidic saga, but Doeg shouldn't take comfort in Saul's greater wickedness. God has his own judgment coming. He will be cut off. And again, hell is the ultimate expression of that for any soul. But not only will he be cut off, there's a second expression or second comeback of the Lord. He's not only cutting the unjust punishment, the wicked off, but he's also displaying that in front of his saints. He's displaying his justice in front of his saints, right? It says here that in verse 6, the righteous shall see. The righteous shall see and fear, and look what they do, shall laugh. What did Psalm 2 say? God laughs at the wicked. What are the righteous doing? They're laughing at the wicked. Again, not because it's funny, because they actually thought they could upend God, because they actually thought they could disrupt his scheme, that they actually thought they could keep David from the throne, that they actually thought they could keep Christ from his victory and his glory, that they actually think they can keep you from yours. That's laughable, right? And so God not only cuts them off, but he displays it. Now, I find it strange. Well, I guess it's not completely strange. It seems like the spirit of the times that we have shied away from talking about the judgment of God. We don't want to talk about it. It's like we think it impugns God's character to talk about hell, to talk about his righteous wrath and his indignation towards sin. And so we shy away from those kinds of topics in this culture and in churches. But do you realize the moment you've shied away from that in an attempt to try to keep yourself from impugning God's goodness, you've actually impugned God by doing that. Because God says his judgment and justice are an extension of his glory. They are what in part makes him radiant. They are what makes him shine. In Revelation 19, 1 through 3, you're welcome to turn this. This is a beautiful example of this. As the church glorified is sitting around and they're worshiping in the courts of heaven in Revelation 19, 1 through 3, listen to what they think makes God so glorious, what makes God so worthy of worship. It says, after this I heard what seemed to be a loud voice of a great multitude in heaven crying, Hallelujah! Salvation and glory and power belong to our God, for his judgments are true and just. For he has judged the great prostitute who corrupted the earth with her immorality and has avenged on her the blood of her servants. Once more they cried out, Hallelujah! The smoke from her goes up forever and ever. Does this sound like God's character is impugned by his wrath and judgment? Not at all. He's marveled at by the saints. And none of this will appear as unjust. None of this will occur to anybody as God's overstepping or going too far. But all will be made right. It will be settled then, right? And God will be glorious for it. So not only does he cut off as God comes back to the wicked, but he displays his glorious judgment. It doesn't eclipse. Hell doesn't eclipse God's glory. His justice doesn't eclipse his glory. It makes it shine brighter. And the righteous benefit. Verses 6 and 7 not only say the righteous watch this, but it says they benefit from witnessing God's justice. How? How do the righteous benefit? Well, they fear the Lord. When you look back and you see the destruction on Egypt, when you look back and you read about how God raised up Assyria to judge Israel, the northern kingdom, but then he turns around and judges Assyria, when you look and see how God executes his judgments in the earth, it should stoke a sense of fear. This God is an awesome God and he doesn't tolerate sin. Right? There should be we should feel disconcerted when the Bible describes in the New Testament God as a burning fire, a consuming fire. Right? The righteous fear, the biblical judgments of God produce a healthy fear of the holiness of God, a fear that we have largely lost in the church today. But the second way they benefit is they get to become like God in his laughter, not maniacal, sick, twisted laughter. Remember a lot of these, lately I've noticed this more in like doctor's office where they have like fail army clips or instant karma. I'm trying to think of how they call these things online, where somebody's doing something, playing stupid games and they're winning stupid prizes. You see these guys that are maybe sledding or taking a kayak off the roof of their house, try to get to the pool, and then they cut the clip right as it looks like they probably broke their neck. Right? That kind of instant karma, that's not what we're sitting around laughing at. That's not what this means. It just means we will be like God and we will say, aha, I see this for what it is. And that's exactly what David's saying, reflecting on this horrific event. Aha, I see this for what it is. All right? And sometimes it takes time to reflect, but this is how God comes back ultimately in the end. And the comeback of the Lord is ultimately seen in the coming back of the Lord. All these things David's foretelling is seen in the return of Christ. But again, there's still time to shelter in him now. There's still time to plug back into the Lord of life. Right? So leads us to the third thing. I did call this the unintended effects of the wicked. Well, how does it affect the faithful? And thirdly, the condition of the faithful. Well, if we note the composition of the wicked and what they're made of, what they're about, and we've witnessed the comeback of God, where does that leave faithful men and women, even in the worst case scenario, right? You can think of the forest fire illustration again. Destroys a lot of underbrush, destroys dead wood, dead leaves, but it's good for the tree. Clears out the stuff that would threaten the root system. It clears out what would threaten sunlight and rob it from the great source of life. But the same thing happens, I think, to the faithful. In verses 8 and 9, David says, I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. Isn't this ironic? It was being at the house of God, the tabernacle, looking for the food from God, that got David in this trouble in the first place. And here is Doeg trying to capitalize on this. And David says in his post-Doeg condition, I am like a green olive tree in the house of God. Can you imagine David witnessing the decomposition of Saul's soul? Knowing Saul from before when he was just young childhood friends, with Jonathan, to seeing Saul's anger mount quickly over his victory. And to see him getting more and more ravenously deranged. And as David is watching this, he's seeing the exact opposite of what God's doing in his heart and in his life. While Saul has fallen to pieces, David's roots are getting established deep in God, right? And so he gives us three things here. Three things that he uses to describe him. And four things, and I put them all in T's. Jamie noted this morning, and I appreciate his keen observation. He said, your seminary has paid off. You alliterated everything this morning. Good job. I hope I learned more than that at seminary, but hey, I'll take it. But some people need to remember things, and I'm one of them, so I try to put things where I can try to remember them in my mind. But here are the four T's. This is how David describes his state after this Doeg incident. Number one, he's thriving in God's presence. He's thriving. That's what it means to be thriving in the house of God. He doesn't mean I literally have to be in the house of God. He's using the house of God as a symbol of God's presence, as all of Israel did. And he's saying, I'm thriving in the presence of God. Secondly, he describes his condition as trusting in God's love. I trust in the steadfast love of God forever and ever. Number three, he's thanking God for his just rule. I thank you, God, because you did it. You are the one that brought justice and brings the balance. So he's thriving, he's trusting, he's thanking, and then fourthly, he's together with others who hope in God's name or reputation. Right? He's with others. He says, I will thank you forever because you have done it. I will wait for your name, your reputation. You are the deliverer. You are the God of Israel. You are the one who saves. I will wait on that, but not just by myself, in the presence of not only you, but the godly, with other people who also wait on your name, who also trust in you. That's the consequence of this scenario. Doeg didn't intend that. Saul certainly didn't intend it, but they took this harm that they were hurling at David. God took it, and he made him better, stronger, more rooted, more surrounded with the faithful than he was had this incident not happened, right? And I think so often we wish bad things don't happen to us, or we wish people wouldn't behave the way they would to us, and we don't realize how much God is shaping us through that. To be dependent on him, to lean into him. This is all, and I'm certain, again, Doeg didn't intend this. The devil certainly didn't intend this. But David's depth and how far, as Jesus describes being in the palm or in the hand of the Father and not losing one of them, it's like David's being pressed deeper into the palm of God. Even harder to lose if that were even possible. And it's not, right? Because of this incident. The condition of the faithful is always better after the wicked attempt to harm them, even if they succeed. Isn't that amazing? Even if the wicked succeed in ultimately bringing it into your life, you still prevail. I don't often quote from Soren Kierkegaard, but he says, the tyrant dies and his rule is over. The martyr dies and his rule begins. Isn't that beautiful? The tyrant dies and his rule is over. The martyr dies and his rule begins. As he goes and he sits there in the throne room reigning with Christ, being with him. And I can't help but think of, they've discovered in the last decade or so, vibrant ecosystems living in volcanoes. Volcanoes. Nothing should live there. But they're finding all sorts of organisms in underwater volcanoes and underwater organisms in beyond boiling water. And they can live and they're thriving there. The saints of God thrive in the heat because they lean into God in the heat. They don't wither. Their roots just grow deeper. And they draw more from God. And so as we close this out, if the worst happens, even if the wicked rise up and the righteous are few all around us, all we need to do is go back. If you don't remember anything else about tonight's message, all you need to do is go back to this title. If you see wickedness reigning supreme in the world, if every time you turn on the news it just makes you depressed, you just need to remember the title. The steadfast love of God endures. If that's all you get, then that's worth getting. But I want to give you three other things in closing. Number one, check for the components of wickedness in your own life. All right, we looked at different parts, right? We looked at internal, we looked at external. Assess your loves. Are your loves out of whack? Are they misprioritized? Do you find yourself loving and preferring things that are not going to help you thrive, that are not godly, right? Do you notice your speech? Watch your speech patterns, how you talk to your children, how you talk to your spouse, how you talk to your church members, how you talk to the jerks at the office. And ask yourself, what is that speech telling me about my heart? Not they made me do it. If you knew who I had to work with, if you knew this woman I had to live with, not me personally. But you may say that. And the point is that has nothing to do with it. It's revealing your heart when you speak that way, when you yell that way, right? And so check yourself for a component. That's why we broke it down into the composition. Check yourself for components of wickedness. Number 2, remember this, God always gets the last laugh. Right now, it really feels like the arrogant, wicked of this world that sit on top of Fortune 500 companies and all these peasants that go and worship in little churches and little Jesus that they serve. It really feels like that sometimes, doesn't it? But our God is in heaven, and he laughs at this kind of derision and mockery of the righteous, because he already knows the place he's preparing for us. He already knows the reign where we will judge angels and be set to rule over the nations with Christ. And he knows all of this. Thirdly, the condition of the faithful. I want you to think about the condition. What condition are you in? Are you thriving? Are you trusting? Are you thankful? Are you thinking? Are you together with others who do the same? If you are, then that is because God in his grace is using even some of the hardest circumstances of your life to press you and to mold you and to make you more like Jesus Christ in the end. And so as we go to the Lord in prayer and as we go through our weeks, we've got much to consider in our own lives. We've got much to consider in our patterns and habits of things, and we've got much to look forward to. Join me in prayer. Father, we thank you that David could pen these words under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit and look back at an experience most of us would probably be consumed with guilt over for even going to Ahimelech in the first place. Most of us would look back at this and just hold bitterness and resentment toward Doeg the Edomite. It would be very hard, Father, for most of us in this room to reflect the way he did. Recognizing first and foremost, Lord, that you and your steadfast love never leave, even in hard circumstances. Doeg may have been ignorant to that, but David was not. Make us aware of that too in our hardships. Recognize how supreme you are on your throne, Lord. And he recognized that in your hands, even the worst, most toxic, volcanic situations are preparing and fitting your people for eternal glory. And David could only long and look forward to the day his ancestor Christ would come. And he would pay the penalty for death and show the ultimate expression of how even the wicked in their schemes have unintended consequences. For if the principalities in darkness had known what Jesus was going to accomplish through his death, they would not have crucified him. Thank you for bringing glory out of the gloom and for raising up your people from ashes. Help us to walk in humility and be mindful of our own wicked tendencies, Lord, and may we keep a short list of sin before you.